Thank you for taking some general questions on Clause 1, which may save us some time later. As you're aware, the opposition has expressed an interest in an amendment that might provide for a review of this legislation after 3 years. I gave some commentary in my second reading speech as to how we might have benefited had such a review been undertaken in 2015. I wonder whether the government has given any consideration to this proposition and/or whether the minister has any concerns with the proposal.
Thank you for Member for Morialta. I think it's a sensible suggestion and I'm willing to support it.
Excellent start, thank you. Has the minister received any advice on whether these legislative changes will have any impact on staff or workforce numbers?
Thank you, Member for Morialta. No advice has been received. Well, in fact, there has been advice received, but that there will be no impact on workforce numbers because of this. In terms of student impact, yes, but my hope and the advice is that that impact will be positive in terms of what TAFE can do for students. But other than those two things, my answer is no.
Vein, has the minister had any advice or discussions with officers specifically related to the impact of these changes on industry engagement and industry outcomes as compared to the current Act?
Yes, good question, Member for Morialta. A couple of things I'd say to that. There was a lot of industry engagement that went into the Jeannie Ray review, which has then informed the amendments which we are proposing here. So that is one thing, but also some of the changes that we are making around board representation. I think we're in Clause 9, and we might touch upon it later, so I won't go into too many specifics, but he's talking about more direct industry experience and engagement, which is certainly something that I think is needed. And one of the comments you probably have heard me say, perhaps in regard to our tech colleges and why the tech colleges of years gone past sort of went out of vogue, I think that kind of nexus between industry, real industry experience, sort of on the tools and what's needed by employers and what was being offered by TAFE and tech colleges got broken, and therefore employers didn't see as much of a benefit as they perhaps once did in taking graduates of tech colleges or trade schools, and we need to keep that tight, otherwise the same thing will happen again, and that applies to TAFE just as much.
I'll put that Clause 1 stand as printed. All those in favour say aye. Against, declare it carried. And I understand I'm putting Clause 2 to 5 stand as printed. All those in favour say aye. Against, declare it carried. Clause 6, Member for Morialta.
Clause 6 relates to the functions, and indeed it's a fairly broad clause. I think the minister in the description of the bill explained that when the board is operating as they run TAFE, obviously they are responsible to the minister for, I forget the name of the statement, but the one that replaces the charter and the performance statement. There's a new version of that where the government can set the directions for the TAFE board. But the essential premise of the bill is that rather than relying on operating in the best interests of TAFE SA as a corporation, which is the current situation, the board's running orders, in the absence of specific direction, will be the functions in the Act. I'm wondering, in particular, in relation to the situation with the way that TAFE engages with non-government training providers. Particularly, I note that at 6(2)(c), there is a function where it's about authorising the use of land, buildings, equipment, facilities or services used for technical and further education for commercial, community or other purposes for a fee or otherwise. And as far as I can tell, that gives a passive power to TAFE SA in which they can engage with non-government providers. And at 4B, we're now on page 7 at the top, there is TAFE must perform its functions in an efficient and effective manner, including, bracket, if practicable, bracket, through shared use of its services, facilities and resources. I'm wondering if the Minister can reflect on the matter. I mean, we understand that as is not unusual in any training provider that has infrastructure, but not every day that infrastructure is used. And historically, and I think this is reflected in the comments of the Skills Commission in the Ray report, if I'm correct, there has been a historic bias towards TAFE middle management potentially saying no to non-government providers or community or industry bodies seeking to access that. And the opportunity then is there for, that I'm wondering whether the Minister has considered more explicitly including in the functions guidance to the board and the organisation to seek those opportunities or to lean into a yes rather than no. I'm not proposing a specific amendment here, and I realise that this can in some ways be defined by the government's directions and encouragements to TAFE, but between the houses I think it is certainly the opposition's interest in exploring whether it is possible to more proactively articulate encouragement for the TAFE SA organisation to take what Associate Professor Ray and I think the Minister has described as its leadership role in TAFE matters in South Australia, to the extent of actively supporting the public good that can come out of training being provided by non-government providers.
You, Member for Morialta, I think good points that are made there, and I agree with almost everything that you've said, to be perfectly frank. And I think the statement of priorities, which is I think the document you allude to that will replace some of the existing documents, I can set those things out, and I think I can say safely in this place that I intend to do that, and I've been quite strong on that in my 3.5 years as Minister, and I continue to do that. And you correctly referred to something that Jeannie said in her report about promoting the use of TAFE facilities with non-TAFE providers where they aren't being used by TAFE, and I think we would be silly not to do that, particularly at a time where we've got huge skills challenge in front of us. We do not have the luxury of having skills facilities, TAFE or otherwise, sitting around not being used when there is another provider, government or otherwise, who'd be keen to use them. So I note you said you weren't proposing an amendment. For what it's worth, I think that's the right thing because we considered it, and I don't think it's necessary, but I can speak to that in my statement of priorities, and I intend to do that should this bill be successful.
For Morialta.
I won't ask a question, I'll just offer a quick appreciation of the Minister's response and the commitment of what he proposes to do in the statement of priorities, and indicate that the opposition will give further consideration as to whether an amendment we believe an amendment would be helpful here. And as I think the Minister has indicated, I know the Honourable Dennis Hood will be seeking to engage constructively with the government between the houses, and so I'm sure this may form part of those suggestions. Happy to move on.
In that case, I'll put the clause 6 stand as printed. Those in favour say aye. Against, declare it carried. Where would you like to go now? 9. Then I'll put that clauses 7 and 8 stand as printed. Those in favour say aye. Against, declare it carried. Clause 9, Member for Morialta.
Thank you. Clause 9 relates to the board appointments and responsibilities, and the opposition's view is that broadly this clause is well constructed and appropriate. I'm usually not of the view that you want to be too prescriptive unless necessary on specific appointments, but I do think that there is potentially an opportunity for one amendment that the opposition is considering, and I'd be keen to get the Minister's consideration of it, if not a response immediately, at least potentially an indication of whether there is anything we've missed or whether the government might consider it between the houses. And I particularly refer to regional representation. I note that at 9.4b, the broad skill sets required of the board, or at least the skills matrix for the effective performance of the TAFE SA's function, have to include, and B says, knowledge or expertise in the education and training of persons who have experienced disadvantage in accessing education, training and work, or are from non-metropolitan, regional or remote areas. Now, in the Minister's second reading conclusion speech, he highlighted, as I think he did in the first one, and is apparent to anyone, that not only is TAFE as the public provider going to be the largest provider of training across the state, that is particularly so in the regions where there is a thinner market of training provision, if you like, and lower margins available that might attract non-government providers or greater costs for the not-for-profits. And so, given the specific and particular priority and requirement for TAFE to serve our regional areas, the opposition is very keen to see not just the skills matrix informed as I just described, but a specific inclusion of somebody who lives and potentially works in regional South Australia. My recollection is that I appointed Jen Cleary to the board. I imagine that the Minister has probably, for all I'm aware, included regional representation in his own considerations since. I think that it would be counterintuitive for anyone to take seriously a TAFE SA board skills matrix that didn't include somebody living in regional South Australia. And so with that in mind, I think that it would be an extraordinarily low-risk proposition to a sensible board composition to include it as a requirement. And I might leave it there for the Minister to respond to, other than to say that I think that 4B, as is currently described, doesn't require that somebody even have the knowledge or expertise of rural and regional and non-metropolitan areas because of the construction of the sentence saying that it's either, as far as I can tell, either knowledge or expertise of somebody experiencing disadvantages in accessing education, training and work, or are from regional and remote. I'm not wanting to downplay the importance of understanding disadvantage, but as far as I can read it, there is no requirement from that clause that somebody even understands or has knowledge of regional South Australia, let alone lives there.
Thank you, Member for Murray-Alta. Your observations are correct. That clause in terms of 4B asks that the Minister, in nominating members for appointment, must ensure that those nominated include persons who together have. So yes, you are right. And we thought long and hard about being more prescriptive in terms of who is on the board. And as I'm sure you would recall all too well from your time as a minister, it is a bit of a slippery slope once you start doing that. And I'm conscious that the TAFE board is already a large board, and I quite routinely get feedback from chairs of boards in my portfolio areas that can become quite unwieldy and difficult. So I grappled with the idea of doing that, but I found it hard to find a way of doing it without expanding the board, which would create its own problem. Having said that, you're right about the things you have said in terms of regional South Australia. I have appointed 2 regional people for that deliberate reason, Helen Strickland, who I think is Mount Gambier, South East, and Andrea Broadfoot from Upper Spencer Gulf region. I want them on there because they not only have regional experience, but they live in the regions and are well embedded in their communities. So I've certainly made that a priority in my time. Short answer to your question, though, is that we continue to be in discussions with the Honourable Dennis Hood about that. So I'm not closed off to it.
If there are no further questions, I will put that Clause 9 stand as printed. Those in favour say aye. Against, declare it carried. Clause 10, Member for Murray-Alta.
Thank you. I was interested in this clause while I was reflecting on the historical context of 2017 in my second reading speech. Perhaps, and particularly the mechanism by which the Governor may remove a director from the office on the recommendation of the Minister at Clause 10.3, and the Minister may recommend the removal of a director on any ground that the Minister thinks fit at 10.4. And I suppose my simple question is this the same as in the current Act, or is there a change? If there's been a change, why is that the case? And in either case, is the Minister able to explain how this mechanism would work in practice?
Yes, thank you for the question, Member for Murray-Alta. It is the same as it was, except for a small change to 4 and the removal of E, which were both done by Parliamentary Council on their advice. Apparently they are updating those in acts as they go, and that is all. Other than that, it will operate as already operated in the past, and was not something that I requested or that came about through the roadmap review.
I thank the Minister for that, and I appreciate the I think, correct action that the member for Port Adelaide took in 2017. I don't think there would be too wildly diverging views on that in relation to the exercise of this power. I genuinely speak from a place of ignorance. I don't think I ever had suggested to me during my time as Minister that it would be required to remove a director or a chair of a board. There were possibly examples where we didn't stress too much when somebody's expiry was coming up, and there were examples where we were desperately trying to convince people to renew. The feedback that I've had from board chairs is similar to that the Minister has had in relation to the way that boards operate, and I think it's pretty effective in this department for the most part. I guess the second part of my question is genuinely, can the Minister, or has the Minister got advice into how this works? Does it have to, it doesn't describe having to go through Cabinet here, but does it have to go through Cabinet, or is it just a memo from the Minister to the Governor? Is there some other process that would benefit future ministers if anyone's ever placed in the same position that the member for Port Adelaide was unfortunately placed in 2017?
The advice I have is that would still have to go through Cabinet and to the Governor.
Clause 13, sir.
Very well. I'll put clause 10 stand as printed. All those in favour say aye. Against, declare it carried. And I'll also put the question that clauses 11 and 12 stand as printed. All those in favour say aye. Against, I declare it carried. Clause 13. Member for Marialta.
Clause 13. Sorry, I'm just checking something. Thank you. Yes, clause 13. Is this a new clause?
It has not just been a change in the reference to the Public Sector Honesty and Accountability Act, which is a name change, otherwise not a new clause.
The Minister and seek his advice then, just in terms of operation. I recall, and I'm sure the Minister had the same experience, but when you advertise for positions on the TAFE board, it's seen as an attractive board to be on by many people who want to contribute to the state of South Australia. My recollection is that I sort of felt that if people were a chief executive or a senior officer of an RTO that was not TAFE SA, then I struggled to imagine how they would be able to fully contribute to the TAFE SA board without having to remove themselves from a vast number of their items due to conflicts. So I would imagine that this clause presumably would capture those people. I was reflecting, I think there's the head of a group training organisation that's on the TAFE board at the moment, and obviously I suspect that they would be the sort of person for whom this clause may be written to, just because they have an indirect interest in training and the technical and further education sector as a customer of TAFE and other RTOs. Am I correct in assuming then that this is providing clarity that somebody with that industry connection, the fact that they use RTOs, shouldn't be seen as a barrier to their participation on the TAFE board? That's my understanding. Is that a fair assessment?
That's a good observation. And what I can say is this isn't in here or being maintained in a bid to prevent people who might run an RTO or with genuine RTO experience from being on the board. I would not want that. I think we need to have that for the reasons you understand very well, but it is there to help us navigate what can be tricky areas. CITB can be like that as well, so we are conscious of that and just making sure that we manage it well, but I wouldn't want to prevent TAFE from having people on its board who have had that genuine experience in actually running a training provider, which is not the public one.
If that's, yes, confirm, I believe that it is important for people with training experience, to be honest, and I think that in my experience, when somebody applied who had past experience of running a training organisation, that made them a very attractive proposition, especially if they no longer were actively working in that area, and appreciate the Minister's response. So I have no further questions until clause 23.
Okay, in that case, I will put clause 13 stand as printed. All those in favour say aye. Against, declare it carried. And 14 to 22. I'll put the question that clause 14 to 22 stand as printed. All those in favour say aye. Against, declare it carried. Clause 23, Member for Morialta.
Thank you, sir. This relates to barring notices, and we've discussed previously in relation to schools, both in recent legislation and in the 2019 Education Act, when there were new barring notices and provisions put in place. In most recent legislation relating to schools, my understanding is that their barring notices are appealable to the Minister, and my understanding from a brief read here, unless I've missed something, is that they are not in this Act. I guess a very simple question that I might put in three parts, and the Minister can respond to all of them at once, or we can see how we go. Why are these different from schools? Why can't we have an appeals process to the Minister? And would the government consider supporting an amendment to replicate the schools model?
Right, I'll try to answer in the three-part format. Thank you for that. We did contemplate this because obviously it was fresh in our minds due to the changes we've made around schools because of the behaviour that we are seeing increasingly from parents who are exhibiting abusive behaviour online, exhibiting abusive behaviour in a perimeter around the school, all those sorts of things, and we came to the conclusion that we aren't seeing that with TAFE, those two examples. Now, if that were to change, I've already said in this place that we will support a 3-year review, and I think that would be a good thing to have in the 3-year review, is to say how are the barring orders going, are we seeing abusive behaviour? And I can say, I know from a personal perspective why this is needed, may I say, in regards to TAFE with an unfortunate incident, and I'm sure some of our staff have copped that as well. So this is important we put it in place, but I haven't seen any evidence of it being perpetrated in the online environment that would necessitate the exact same changes we have made to schools. But if that changes, there will be that 3-year review in which to contemplate that. Would we contemplate a review or appeals process, as you are familiar with and as the member for Port Adelaide is familiar with, around barring notices? Yes, we would.
Excellent. I'll put then that clause 23 stand as printed. All those in favour say aye. Against, declare it carried. Where would you like to go now, Member
To the next bill.
Very well. In that case, I will put the clauses 24 to 33 stand as printed. All those in favour say aye. Against, I declare it carried. There is a schedule. I'll put that stand as printed. All those in favour say aye. Against, declare it carried. And the title. I'll put the question that the title stand as printed. All those in favour say aye. Against, declare it carried. Etc. Etc. And Minister, would you like to move the bill now be read a third time?
I move that this bill now be read a third time.
It's been moved. Is that seconded? All those in favour say aye. Against, declare it carried. Mr Clark.
A bill for an act to continue TAFE SA to repeal TAFE SA Act 2012 and to make consequential amendments to certain other acts and for other purposes.